and Section 37 of the Specific Relief Act. Permanent injunctions are primarily governed from Section 38 onwards, 38 to 42 of the Specific Relief Act. Now, I'll be dealing with both temporary as well as permanent injunctions separately as to how and when can they be granted and what are the parameters which the courts have laid down for grant of such temporary and permanent injunctions. So I'll begin with temporary injunctions. So temporary injunctions are governed by Section 94C and E, read with Order 39, Rule 1 and 2 of the Code of Civil Procedure. So if you have Section 94, Section 94 says that in order to prevent the ends of justice from being defeated, the court may, if it is so prescribed, and C says grant a temporary injunction in case of disobedience commit the person guilty thereof to the civil prison in order that his property be attached and sold. And E says make such other interlocutory orders as may appear to the court to be just and convenient. So this is the substantive provision under the Code of Civil Procedure which deals with grant of injunctions. Now the procedural part of grant of injunctions, as we all know, is governed by Order 39, Rule 1 and 2 of the Code of Civil Procedure. We all have applied Order 39, Rule 1 and 2 in all our civil suits, and the questions regarding thereto arise day in and day out. Now, the three principles which we all know apply to grant of injunction under Order 39, Rule 1 and 2 are, firstly, that the plaintiff who is claiming the injunction should have a prima facie case in his favor. Two, that the balance of convenience should also be in favor of the plaintiff. And three, there should be irreparable loss that must be caused to the plaintiff if the injunction is not granted. So I will deal with all these three conditions separately and some discussion by various judgments which have interpreted and expanded as to what do you mean by prima facie case, balance of convenience, and irreparable loss separately. Now, the first principle which applies is prima facie case. Now, prima facie case is for the plaintiff to establish that there is some case in favor of the plaintiff and that he is likely to succeed in the case ultimately. At the stage of considering whether the plaintiff has a prima facie case or not, it is not for the court to examine as to the complete merits of the case. The court is only called upon to decide as to, on an overall conspectus of the facts and documents which have come on record, whether the plaintiff is likely to succeed. It is not that the court will determine as to whether the plaintiff will definitely succeed. So this question had come up in the celebrated judgment of the Supreme Court in Marine Burn Limited versus R.N. Banerjee, which is a 1958 Supreme Court judgment, wherein the Supreme Court said, and I quote, "A prima facie case does not mean a case proved to the hilt, but a case which can be said to be established if the evidence which is led in support of the same were believed. While determining whether a prima facie case has been made out, the relevant consideration is whether on the evidence led, it was possible to arrive at the conclusion in question and not as to whether that was the only conclusion which could be arrived at on that evidence. So if we analyze what the Supreme Court had laid down way back in the year 1958, it is clear that the plaintiff does not have to establish that he will definitely succeed after the trial is over and after both parties have led their respective evidences. The plaintiff only has to establish before the court that after leading on the basis of the pleadings and the documents, that after the evidence is led, it is possible that he would succeed, and it is not necessary for him to show that he will definitely succeed. So if the plaintiff can establish at this stage that there is a possibility of the plaintiff succeeding, then it would be said that the plaintiff has a prima facie case. The courts have said that it is if on the basis of pleadings and documents, the court comes to a conclusion that there is no chance of plaintiff succeeding, that the court will ultimately hold that there is no prima facie case in favor of the plaintiff. Now, the second question which arises is as to who has to prove this prima facie case. I've already indicated that the obligation to prove the existence of a prima facie case is always on the plaintiff. That there is some infraction of the enjoyment of his property or the right which would entitle him to grant of injunction. Now, one differentiating feature which arises day in and day out is that at times it is confused that the plaintiff has to show his prima facie title if it's a property case. Now, there is a clear distinction which the Supreme Court has laid down between prima facie case and prima facie title. Prima facie, it is only plaintiff has to show prima facie case on the basis of his pleadings and the documents which he has produced, and not prima facie title. It is only the question of prima facie case which the court has to consider, and not the question of prima facie title. This was laid down in Dalpat Kumar versus Prahlad Singh by the Supreme Court in the year 1993. So this is what the court has held qua prima facie case. Grant of temporary injunctions is the question of balance of convenience. Now we must keep in mind that showing prima facie case in itself is not enough. All three parameters of prima facie case, balance of convenience, as well as irreparable loss have to be shown by the plaintiff while showing to claim an injunction of a temporary nature. Even if one of them is missing, then the court will not grant an injunction. That has been settled, laid down quite authoritatively by the Supreme Court itself. Now, the question of balance of convenience has dogged our courts for a lot many years now. What does balance of convenience mean? So the question of balance of convenience I would say in other words would mean that the court will compare the mischief or the hardship or maybe inconvenience which is likely to be caused to the plaintiff by refusing the injunction, and would compare that with the hardship or inconvenience which would be caused to the defendant or the opposite party by granting it. So the court will assess as to the hardship or the inconvenience, I'll say in other words, inconvenience will be which will be caused to the plaintiff by not grant of injunction, while the suit may ultimately succeed, as compared to grant of a temporary injunction in a case where the suit will ultimately fail. So on one hand, there'll be the plaintiff who may get an injunction and some may not get an injunction while he may succeed in the suit. And on the other hand, we may have a defendant succeeding at not succeeding at the interim stage, that is, plaintiff getting an injunction while the suit may ultimately fail. So the inconvenience caused to the parties in both these situations have to be weighed by the court, and then the court will come to a conclusion as to where does where the balance lies as to who will be inconvenienced more. If it is the plaintiff who would be inconvenienced more, then the court will grant an injunction or may grant an injunction. And in case the court finds that that balance tilts in favor of the defendant, then the court may not grant an injunction. So that is the principle of balance of convenience. So that again, which was laid down by Dalpat Kumar, which dealt with this aspect as well. There is another decision of our Delhi High Court, Anwar Elahi versus Vinod Mishra, wherein the court again laid down this comparative mischief rule and held that the inconvenience which is likely to issue from withholding the injunction, if the inconvenience which is likely to issue from withholding the injunction will be greater than which is likely to arise from granting it, then the court will find that the balance of convenience lies in favor of the plaintiff and would then grant injunction. So this is what the Supreme Court and the Delhi High Court has laid down for a balance of convenience, and the comparative mischief rule is the one which has been applied consistently over the years for deciding whether the balance of convenience lies in favor of the party seeking injunction or not. Now, the third limb of the grant of injunctions is irreparable loss. Now, at times, it has been confused by saying that there should be an injury wherein there is no possibility of repairing that injury. Now, that is not the correct proposition of law. What the Supreme Court has repeatedly laid down is that irreparable injury means an injury which is a material one. It is not necessary that it should be one which cannot be repaired at all. Now, the question which has arisen again and again is, what is the test that we lay down that the injury which has been caused to the party claiming or is likely to be caused to the party claiming is a material one? Now, one test which has been repeatedly laid down by various courts is that an injury will be regarded as an irreparable one when there is no pecuniary standard for measuring of damages. So it could be in a case where there is no other remedy available to the plaintiff and damages by itself would not give adequate relief to the plaintiff. So if damages would be an adequate relief, then the court will find that the irreparable loss, there is no irreparable loss to the plaintiff. But if the court finds that the damages would not be an adequate relief, then the court will find that there is an irreparable loss to the plaintiff. Now, there is one interesting decision by the Odisha High Court, which lays down, this is Orissa State Commercial Transport Corporation Limited versus Satyanarayan Singh. It's in the 1974 decision. And I'll just quote one line from this judgment. It says, irreparable injury means the injury which cannot be adequately remedied by damages. The remedy by damages would be inadequate if the compensation ultimately payable to the plaintiff in case of success in the suit would not place him in the position in which he was before the injunction was refused. So the test which has been laid down is that if the plaintiff can be put in the same place as he was before the injunction was refused, then the court will find that the irreparable loss has not been caused to the plaintiff. But in a case where he cannot be put in the same position, then the court will find that there is an irreparable loss which is being caused to the plaintiff. Now, a perfect example of that could be of a suit which relates to a property which has a sentimental value to the plaintiff. Supposing the suit pertains to a picture which belongs to the forefathers of the plaintiff, but not of the defendants. So that picture is of sentimental value to the plaintiff, and the loss of that picture under no circumstances can be compensated to the plaintiff in terms of money. So in such situation, the court will may ultimately find that there is an irreparable loss to the plaintiff and which cannot be remedied by way of damages, because no matter how much damages you grant to the plaintiff, because the picture is of a sentimental value to the plaintiff, the damages would not be an adequate. So in that situation, the court will find that there is an irreparable loss which has been caused to the plaintiff. So these were the three parameters which were laid down for grant of temporary injunction. Now, just two more aspects which I would want to deal with by dealing as to whether when would the court grant injunctions or not. Now, one other factor which has been repeatedly laid down as to whether the injunctions will be granted or not is the court will also examine as to whether the conduct of the plaintiff or the party seeking the injunction has been completely blameless. It is even at this stage under Order 39 Rule 1 and 2, because Order 39 Rule 1 and 2 injunction is a discretionary remedy, that the court will consider the conduct of the party seeking an injunction. If the court finds that the conduct of the party who is seeking an injunction is not completely overboard, the court will be well within its rights to refuse an injunction. Order 39, an injunction is an equitable remedy, and it is settled law that one who seeks equity must come with clean hands. So if the court finds that the plaintiff has not come to court with clean hands, it will refuse an injunction. Now, it is also settled law and is provided for under Section 95 that the court also has the power to ask the party who is claiming an injunction to deposit security or security for compensation, or give an undertaking for the payment of compensation. So 94 says in order to prevent the ends of justice from being defeated, the court may, if it is so prescribed, direct the defendant to furnish security to produce or any property belonging to him and place the same at the disposal of the court, or order the attachment of a property. Even before sections 94, it has been repeatedly held that the court has the power to direct the party to deposit security or compensation or give an undertaking for this. So these are the principles which have been repeatedly laid down for the grant of temporary injunctions under Order 39, Rule 1 and 2. Now, one question which has been repeatedly arising is as to when and in what circumstances an ex parte order can be passed in favor of the plaintiff. An ex parte order would mean, as we all know, an order being passed at a time when the defendant has not been served and no notice has been given to the defendant as to the nature of the proceedings which have been instituted. Now, such orders are passed under Order 39, Rule 3 of the Code of Civil Procedure. The question as to when such ex parte interim orders can be passed had come up before the Supreme Court in Morgan Stanley Mutual Fund versus Karthik Das. It's a 1994 Supreme Court judgment. And the Supreme Court had laid down certain principles as to when such ex parte interim orders can be passed. So the five principles which have been laid down. The first is where irreparable or extremely serious injury will be caused to the applicant, an ex parte order can be passed. The second would be that the court shall examine the time when the plaintiff got notice of the act complained. Third, if the plaintiff has acquiesced to the conduct of the respondent, then ex parte temporary injunction shall not be passed. The plaintiff should be acting in utmost good faith, and such an order should be for a very short period. So the Supreme Court laid down that it should only be passed in a case where the giving of notice to the defendant would frustrate the period, frustrate the grant of injunction, and an extreme injury would be caused to the plaintiff if the injunction is not granted to the plaintiff at that time, which the Supreme Court had laid down in the year 1994. The question had again come up before the Supreme Court in 2012 in the judgment of Maria Margadia Sequara versus Erasmo Tacchi del Sequara, wherein the Supreme Court said that due care has to be taken while granting such injunctions ex parte. In fact, the Supreme Court said that the safer option would be to give a short notice to the other side and then consider the interim application after hearing both sides. Though the Supreme Court did not say that in no case such injunction should be granted, the Supreme Court did lay down that in case the court finds that any such injunction has to be granted at an interim ex parte stage, then it should be for a very short period and with the condition to give an undertaking to pay realistic costs and to pay mean profits if ultimately it is found that the plaintiff was not entitled to this. So this is the Order 39 Rule 3 are governed. Now 39 Rule 3 lays down two conditions when an injunction is granted. So under Order 39 Rule 3, if an injunction is granted, it is obligatory upon the court to give reasons as to why the court has taken the view that an injunction is to be granted at this very stage and not after the defendant has been put to notice. Now, a question had arisen as to whether what is the consequence of not giving such reasons by the court. It was on one side, it was said that it would be directory because ultimately it is the job of the court to give reasons. And on the other hand, it was argued that once the statute provides for giving reasons, it is obligatory. This controversy was finally settled by the Supreme Court in Shiv Kumar Chadha versus MCD, a 1993 Supreme Court judgment, wherein the Supreme Court ultimately held that giving of reasons is mandatory, and if no reasons are given, then the order is liable to be vacated. So this controversy was then settled by the Supreme Court, which is the position which is prevailing till date. Now, another requirement of Order 39 Rule 3 is that as soon as an order is passed under Order 39 Rule 3, the plaintiff is required, as soon as an ex parte order is passed, the plaintiff is required to send the intimation for the said order having been passed in favor of the plaintiff, and along with the entire paper book to the defendant. And thereafter, file an affidavit before the court stating that such formality has been complied with. Now, again, this question had come up as to whether this compliance to send intimation to the other side is mandatory or directory, and what is the consequence if the plaintiff fails to send such intimation to the other side. So this controversy was decided by a division bench of Delhi High Court in SBL Limited versus Himalaya Drug Company, when the division bench held that the compliance to send intimation is mandatory, and in case the plaintiff omits to send such intimation to the defendant, the only course open to the court will be that the court will simply vacate the ex parte order of injunction, though without expressing any opinion on the merits of the matter, and then leave it open to the parties to get the injunction application adjudicated by arguing their respective sides. So this is how status quo orders, this is how the injunction order, ex parte injunction orders under Order 39 Rule 3 have been dealt with. Now, a question had also arisen as to whether the court can pass orders beyond what is provided for under Order 39 Rule 1 and 2. This question was also settled by the Supreme Court way back in 1962 in Manmohan Lal versus Seth Hiralal, that the court can even exercise powers under 151 of the Code of Civil Procedure to grant an injunction apart from Order 39 Rule 1 and 2. Now, so till now, we have talked about interim prohibitory injunctions. Now, an interesting decision. So if we come back to Specific Relief Act, Section 37 provides for temporary injunctions, and they say they will be granted in terms of the Code of Civil Procedure, and then they will be governed by the Code of Civil Procedure. Now, Section 38 of the Specific Relief Act deals with perpetual injunctions, and 39 deal with mandatory injunction, 40 then with damages. Now, a question had come up before the Supreme Court in Bestseller Retail India Private Limited versus Aditya Birla Nuvo Limited. So the plaintiff in this case was claiming an injunction, whereas the defendant had contended that since the main proceedings itself were barred under Section 14 and 41 of the Specific Relief Act, no temporary injunction could be granted in favor of the plaintiff. Interestingly, the Supreme Court came to a conclusion that Section 37 is governed by Section 37 of the Specific Relief Act provides that temporary injunctions are governed by Order 39 Rule 1 and 2. So the question as to whether 14 and 41 of the Specific Relief Act would apply would come up only at the stage of final adjudication of the proceedings, and then hence Section 14 and 41 do not apply to proceedings at interlocutory stage, and hence there was no bar on the basis of Section 14 and 41 in grant of the said injunctions. This question had in fact come up earlier in S.K. Kapoor's case, and in S.K. Kapoor, it's a 1982 Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court had held that once the final proceedings itself are not maintainable, there is no question of grant of interim injunctions. This judgment was not noted by the Supreme Court in the later decision of Bestseller Retail India Private Limited. So the controversy for these two decisions had ultimately come up in Planet M Retail versus Select Infrastructure Private Limited, and I happen to be the counsel in the matter for the respondent in this matter. So the petitioner had relied upon Bestseller Retail India Private Limited decision to contend that 14 and 41 would not apply at interim stage since this was a Section 9. It was our contention that 14 and 41 will strictly apply, because if the ultimately proceedings no relief can be granted, then no interim relief can be granted. So in this case, it was contended that even for establishing prima facie case, the plaintiff or the petitioner in this case would have to demonstrate that he has some case on merits finally. But if the court finds that there is no case by virtue of application of Section 14 and 41 to be adjudicated finally or relief being granted to the petitioner, the question of any relief being granted at an interim stage does not arise. So in this decision, which is a Delhi High Court single bench decision, the court agreed, and court ultimately did hold that the judgment in Bestseller India Limited would be per incurium because it does not consider the earlier decision of the Supreme Court. Now that leaves me as far as interim injunctions are concerned, with one aspect, which is interim mandatory injunction. Now, the interim prohibitory injunctions are wherein the other side is prohibited by an interim injunction till the time suit is decided from doing a particular act or thing. Interim mandatory injunctions are those wherein the court at an interim stage directs the other side to perform a particular act. So the distinction between prohibitory injunction and mandatory injunction at an interim stage would be that in a prohibitory injunction, the court calls upon the defendant not to do an act, whereas in case of a mandatory injunction, the court will direct the defendant to actually perform an act. Now, the principles for grant of interim mandatory injunctions are much, much stricter as compared to grant of interim prohibitory injunctions. Mandatory interim injunctions are granted only in case of extreme hardship and compelling circumstances, and mostly only in case the status quo as on the date of the filing of the suit is to be maintained. So the normal norm is to preserve the status quo as on the date of the filing of the suit or the last position which the parties do not contest, and leave the final adjudication for the final stage. Now, in order to claim an interim mandatory injunction, not only has the plaintiff to establish prima facie case, a balance of convenience, irreparable loss, but also has to prove that the case falls in an exceptional category where the court should intervene. We will also have to bear in mind that at certain times, interim mandatory injunctions may be in the form of grant of final reliefs, and hence the courts have laid down that the norms for claiming interim mandatory reliefs are much, much stricter. Now, the celebrated case and the landmark case for grant of interim mandatory injunctions is Dorab Kawasji Warden versus Qawmi Sarab Warden. That's 1990 Supreme Court judgment. And the court laid down three principles for grant of interim mandatory injunctions. First is that the plaintiff has a strong case for trial. That is, it shall be of a higher standard than a prima facie case that is normally required for a prohibitory injunction. And again, the other two principles will be that it is necessary to prevent irreparable loss or serious injury, which cannot be compensated in terms of money, and the balance of convenience should also be in favor of the plaintiff. Now, an interesting decision is of the Supreme Court of 2018, which is Samir Narayan Bhojwani versus Aurora Properties and Investments. It's a 2018. It's a full bench judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. And I'll read just 3 lines from this judgment. And the Supreme Court said, there is a marked distinction between molding of relief and granting mandatory relief at an interlocutory stage. As regards the latter, that can be granted only to restore the status quo and not to establish a new set of things differing from the state which existed at the date when the suit was instituted. So the Supreme Court has categorically laid down that even granting a mandatory relief at an interlocutory stage may be to restore the status quo or restore the position which existed at the time of filing of the suit, but it cannot be used to create a completely new state of affairs between the parties. So this is what I had thought of discussing as far as the interim injunctions are concerned, I had also prepared two aspects of on the aspect of grant of injunction in a bank guarantee case and anti-suit injunction. But I believe because we've only covered interim injunctions till now, I would skip those two portions. I will share those judgments on those issues with you, with Nitish, and it can be shared with everybody. And because of want of time, I will then move on to perpetual injunctions. Now, perpetual injunctions are governed by section 38 to 42 of the Specific Relief Act. Now, section 38 to 42, in fact, section 38 itself provides, and I'll read, a perpetual injunction may be granted to the plaintiff to prevent the breach of an obligation existing in his favor, whether expressly or by implication. Now, if we read section 38, there are two sine qua nons for grant of a perpetual injunction. The first is there must be a duty in favor, a duty upon the defendant and a corresponding right in favor of the plaintiff. It is only when there is a right in favor of the plaintiff and a corresponding duty in favor of the defendant that the court will be inclined to grant a perpetual injunction. It will be granted to prevent the breach of such an obligation which the defendant has towards the plaintiff. So such obligation can arise from a contract or otherwise. And if it arises from a contract, then the court will be guided with the principles of specific performance of contracts. Whereas if there is a right to divorce a contract, like in a property, then the court will grant an injunction in various cases, and especially considering that there should not be any standard for ascertaining the damages which are likely to be caused to the plaintiff. Now, that is the principle of section 38. 39 deals with mandatory injunctions, which the principles remain the same as interim mandatory injunctions. Section 40 provides for damages in lieu of or in addition to injunction, which I've already dealt, that if the damages can be ascertained, then the court may or may not grant an injunction in the final case. Now, section 41 is what has been invoked a lot of times as by the defendants as to when injunctions can be refused. Now, the first and the foremost is an injunction cannot be granted to restrain any person from prosecuting a judicial proceeding pending at the institution of the suit in which the injunction is sought, unless such restraint of proceeding. So this provision deals with when a proceeding is already pending on the date seeks an injunction from prosecuting the and B is to restrain any person from prosecuting any proceeding in a court not. So this is where the principle of anti-suit injunction have been evolved over the period of years by our courts. there are various principles which have been laid down by the Supreme Court in Modi Entertainment Net and the
Ankit, can you please repeat 41 because there is some network issue at your end. I think the video is stucking up. We have not
you
been
want me
able
to
to
read
hear
41
41.
again?
Yeah, 41. We have not been able to hear properly. There was a stucking of video.
Okay, I'll go back to 41 again. So 41 is where section 41 deals with as to when injunctions will be refused. So this is in the nature of defenses which are available to the plaintiff, to the defendants, when an injunction is sought by the plaintiff. So the A and B deals with restraint on legal proceedings. So A deals with when a restraint is sought from prosecuting an already pending proceeding, and B is to restrain from instituting a proceeding or prosecuting it in a court which is not subordinate to that court from which injunction is sought. So this is where the principles of anti-suit injunctions were evolved, which were authoritatively considered by the Supreme Court in Modi Entertainment Network versus WSG Cricket PTE. So the court said in exercising such discretion for grant of anti-suit injunction, the various aspects which have to be considered are that the defendant must be amenable to the jurisdiction of the court. If the injunction is declined, the ends of justice will be defeated and injustice will be perpetuated. And also keeping in view the principles of comity and respect for the court, in which the commencement or continuance of the action or proceeding is sought to be restrained. The court said that in a case where more than one forum are available and an anti-suit injunction is sought, the court will consider as if which is the appropriate forum for redressal of the grievance. So the principle of forum convenience would be applied for considering such a situation. C deals with no restraint will be granted from applying to any legislative body. D is to restrain any person from instituting or prosecuting any proceeding in a criminal matter. E is to prevent the breach of a contract, the performance of which would not be specifically enforced. So 14 and 41 of the Specific Relief Act provide for where what are the defenses where these contracts will not be specifically enforced. So if any of the contracts fall in that category, then the court will not grant an injunction. To prevent the G is to prevent a continuing breach in which the plaintiff has acquiesced. So if the plaintiff has already acquiesced to the act of the defendant, the court will not grant an injunction. When equally efficacious remedy can certainly be obtained by any other usual mode of proceeding except in a case of breach of trust. So let me take an example of this. There were various decisions wherein the plaintiff had an agreement to sell in his favor, and the defendant was trying to get out of that agreement. The plaintiff instituted only a suit for injunction, seeking an injunction against the defendant from selling the property. The courts had repeatedly said that because your adequate relief is specific performance and not injunction, such suit simpliciter for injunction would not be maintainable. I will deal with HA later. I is where the conduct of the plaintiff or his agents has been such as to disentitle him to the assistance of the court. And this is where the equity aspect come in. The plaintiff has to approach the court with clean hands. J would be when the plaintiff has no personal interest in the matter. So another example which I wanted to deal with is on whether any equally efficacious remedy can be obtained by any other mode of proceeding is supposing a plaintiff files a suit qua a property, claiming a mere injunction, wherein he knows that the defendant is challenging the title of the plaintiff. Now, the question which had been arising again and again is as to whether in such a case it is obligatory on the part of the plaintiff to claim a declaration qua his title, or only a suit for permanent injunction would suffice. This question was finally settled by the Supreme Court in Anatula Sudhakar versus P. Buchi Reddy in 2008, when the Supreme Court said that if the title of the plaintiff is in clout, a mere suit for permanent injunction without claiming declaration would not be maintainable. So, and the Supreme Court had also discussed as to when it would be considered that the title of the plaintiff is in clout. The Supreme Court would had specifically said that just by defendant stating that the plaintiff has no title would not suffice. There has to be something more to show that the title of the plaintiff is under clout. So next I will deal with section 42. So 42 deals with injunction to perform a negative agreement. Now 41E says that injunction will not be granted to prevent the breach of a contract, the performance of which would not be specifically enforced. Now, one of the section 14 is 14 provides for contracts which are not specifically enforceable. And 14C says a contract which is so dependent on the personal qualification of the parties and that the court cannot enforce specific forms of the material terms. So these are contracts in nature of personal works which the court has always said would not be specifically enforced. So the exception to that would be section 42. So 42 provides for that in case in the agreement, along with positive obligations, there are certain negative obligations, as in the other side has undertaken not to do certain acts. Those obligations can certainly be, an injunction can be granted qua those obligations certainly. So the authoritative pronouncement on section 42 is the judgment of the Supreme Court in Percept Demark India Private Limited versus Zahir Khan, which is the judgment pertaining to a contract between the cricketer Zahir Khan and Percept regarding managing Zahir Khan's affairs. So the Supreme Court laid down various principles as to when section 42 will apply, and the court said an injunction under 42 will be granted only if the following conditions are fulfilled, which are A, that the grant of injunction would not should not affect the performance of a contract of a personal nature, which is barred under section 14. 2, the contracts of personal services, it should be that the contracts of personal services are being specifically enforced. Thirdly, if it will not be granted if it amounts to granting the whole or entire relief which may be claimed at the conclusion of the trial. So this is in sync with the proposition of law that the court will not grant the reliefs which are at the conclusion, which would not be granted finally. Fourthly, if the plaintiff can be fully compensated in terms of money. the court will not grant such injunctions. And 5, the principle which governs injunctive reliefs in such cases of contracts of personal or fiduciary nature, such as management and agency contracts for sportsmen or performing artists, would be governed by this provision. And court said that it would be wrong to put pressure on the defendants. Defendant was Mr. Zahir Khan, to continue to employ in the fiduciary capacity of a manager and agent someone in whom he had lost confidence. So the Supreme Court said that once the nature of duty is fiduciary and the person has lost confidence, the court will not grant an injunction in under section 42. Now that leaves me only with one aspect, which is the recent amendment which have been made to the Specific Relief Act in terms of section 20A and 41HA. Now the legislature, by virtue of 2018 amendment, has incorporated a schedule relating to category of projects and infrastructure subsectors. 20A specifically provides that after this act, if any suit pertains to any of the services which are under Schedule A, then a court shall not grant an injunction which would delay the progress or completion of such infrastructure projects. And similarly, 41HA has been included to say that a final injunction will not be granted which would impede or delay the progress of any such infrastructure project. So the legislature has created a separate class for infrastructure projects, which include transport, energy, water and sanitation, communication, social and commercial infrastructure, and said that no injunctions which would impede the progress of such infrastructure projects would be granted. So in essence, this is the basic overview of the law of injunctions. But the one principal factor which would some grant of injunction is that grant of injunctions, whether interim or final or perpetual, is discretionary. The court will weigh the pros and cons of grant of injunction versus refusing it, and would then consider whether the injunction can be granted or should be granted or not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So there are certain questions.
Over to you, Rupali.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. There are certain questions being asked by our viewers.
Yes, please.
Can I start them?
Yes, please.
So one of the viewers has asked, at once, for what duration temporary injunction can be granted?
Rupali, you will have to come again. I couldn't hear you.
So the question is, at once, for what duration temporary injunction can be granted?
So if it is a case of an ex parte grant of injunction, the courts generally grant it till the next date whenever the court will take it up. But if it is an injunction is granted after hearing both sides, then it is generally granted till the disposal of the suit. But the court is well within its right to limit the operation of the injunction to whatever time period it feels appropriate.
And shall I continue with my next question?
Yes, please.
What is the meaning of second part of section 41 subclause A? Unless such restraint is necessary to avoid multiplicity of proceedings. Can you give any example of this, of Specific Relief Act?
Yes. So one principle which multiplicity of proceedings would mean that if there is likelihood of proceedings being initiated in jurisdictions across the board, then the court will grant an injunction. So one example which has been has been used is when the plaintiff comes to the court to say that defendant is trying to initiate proceedings in a court which would be not a court which is suitable to both parties, and there will be various suits of proceedings which would come up in various courts that the court will grant such an injunction. So an example which readily comes to my mind is supposing a servant was to institute a suit against you in a jurisdiction outside you are situated, wherein he might be situated, which would be a frivolous proceeding. So if the cause of action has arisen probably in Delhi, so an anti-suit injunction can be sought. In fact, 14(1)(a) only talks about 41(a) only talks about suits which are already pending. So in this case, if a suit is already pending of that nature, then the court will grant an injunction.
Thank you so much, sir. So next question is, after the amendment to SP Act, can injunctions be granted where plaintiff can be compensated monetarily?
So after the amendment, section 14 has been amended. In fact, it has been substituted. So the question as to one of the contracts which were not specifically enforceable were where damages is an adequate relief. That provision has been deleted now from section 14. So in my view, though it hasn't been tested as yet to my mind, in my view, that condition having been deleted, even if damages are provided for, the court can grant specific performance.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is, if the plaintiff got the injunction order in his favor and the client, after the injunction is passed, changed the counsel, then what remedy the new counsel have to get the vacation vacated, considering new development or new facts come to the knowledge of the new counsel of the defendant?
Okay, so this question I'll answer in two parts. One, if those new facts or new documents are already on the record.
Sorry, sir, you're not audible at all.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now it is clear.
Okay. So if those facts.
Sir, there's a problem with the audio.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir.
Audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So the question was the determining of new facts. So one, if those facts already form part of your pleadings and the documents, then those facts and documents would have been considered by the court at the time of grant of an interim injunction already. But if those documents and facts were not in the knowledge of the counsel and do not form part of the record, then the first thing which the courts will have to do, the party will have to do, maybe amend its written statement and put those documents on record. And it has been authoritatively laid down. There is a decision of the Supreme Court which says, on the ground of change of facts, a party can certainly maintain a 39 Rule 4, if not a second 39 1 and 2.
Sir, can you give me the citation, please? If sir, sorry,
I'll
sir, if it is possible.
I'm not read. I don't have that citation ready.
Thank you, sir.
Last judgment, because that's a question which has come up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
So, Rupali, if there is any other question?
So yes.
No, sir. Now,
So there are few questions. Hello.
Yes, yes.
Sir,
Yes, yes.
So there are few questions that have been posted on the chat box.
Yes, please.
I would like to ask you. Now this question is, when there is declaratory suit,
Mhm.
can we also pray for injunction?
In a suit for declaration, there is no prohibition in law that you cannot claim an injunction. A declaration is qua declaration of your right. An injunction will be wherein you seek an order against the defendant from interfering with that right. So a declaration with injunction can certainly be sought.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, in a specific performance of case, willingness and readiness are necessary. If you could please provide any latest case law on that.
I
They're
think that,
asking for the
to
case
be
law.
very honest, it is provided in the section 16 of the Specific Relief Act. There are more than 100 judgments of the Supreme Court on the issue that readiness and willingness has to be proved. But yes, if need be, I will share one of the judgments which lays down this proposition.
Thank you, sir. The next question is amendment of 2018 applicable to the pending cases?
Now, this has been a question which has come up. In fact, I have written an article on this. I'll share it with everybody. So, three answers. I've tried to answer that question in three parts. One, if you see all section 10, 14, 20, which have been amended, have been substituted. So, the old sections have been deleted and new sections have been put in. So, it's a case of substitution. So the Supreme Court has said a substitution means that the old provision which existed has been scored off and the new provision had existed from the very beginning. So in that sense, and the amendments made to section 14, 20 and other amendments made would certainly in my view apply to pending proceedings. In fact, I think Calcutta High Court and Allahabad High Court too have already taken a view that they will apply to pending proceedings. There is another reason which in my mind, which to my mind also come to fore. Section 20 specifically is the discretion which the court exercised at the time of final adjudication of the suit, in as much as whatever happened during the pendency of the suit, like delay, was one consideration which the court also weighed while deciding whether the discretion is to be exercised at the final stage or not. So if that discretion is to be exercised at final stage and that discretion has since then been taken away, then it will certainly mean that that discretion is no longer available to be exercised by that court. And I'll share that article. This is a complete article which was carried by Live Law on this very issue, which I had written. I'll share that with you.
Thank you, sir. I think this is the last question we have. It says, how would the present situation of COVID-19 is going to interplay with granting perpetual injunction?
So this question will have to be taken up specifically in a case-specific matter. But in my opinion, if a person is entitled to a perpetual injunction, COVID-19 itself per se would not disentitle that person from grant of an injunction. Of course, it will always depend on the facts and circumstances of each case. At the same time, the grant of injunction is a discretionary remedy, and that remedy the court will have to see as to whether in the facts of that case that remedy can be, that prayer should be granted or not.
Thank you, sir. Since I can find no other questions from our viewers, I would like to extend our heartfelt thank you to you. And on behalf of myself and our team, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, for having spared your time and enlightening us with your noteworthy words, which has let us all enjoy not just a sunny afternoon, but a knowledgeable afternoon today. The subject of today's webinar was such which I'm sure must be dear to every lawyer, especially those practicing in civil law. The ease with which you have explained the 3 principles for claiming injunction was really remarkable. I hope you would help us brush other areas of law also from time to time by consenting to join our platform in times to come. We are grateful to you, sir, for enriching us with a delightful session of that today. I would also like to thank all the participants who spared out their time and be a part of this webinar that was organized by our team. More is coming your way. Stay tuned. Stay safe. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Shobit, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you can take up the question with Ankit.
Hello.
Yes, you can take up the question with Ankit, sir. Shobit.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Shobit.
Sir, can I ask you one question, sir?
Yes, yes,
In this prevailing scenario, sir, in this scenario like lockdown, supposedly X, sir, just take your 1 minute, sir. Sir,
Yes.
it's supposedly X and Y are 2 brothers, and X is out of his house with his whole family to a different state during the lockdown, sir. And if Y, who is his brother of X, break opens the locks and take the possession of his property in the house and change the locks, and what remedy does X has, because he has is not in his house or his state because he's out during the lockdown period, and sir, and what remedy does X has because to stop Y to enter into agreement with third party in respect of his property, that change has the locks has been changed. Thank you, sir.
So, 2 things. One,
Yes,
he
sir.
can file a suit under Section 6 of the Specific Relief Act to claim possession, contending that he was in possession and he has been dispossessed during the last 6 months.
Okay, sir.
That is one. But your
Okay,
question,
sir.
I believe, is seeking an injunction for selling the property, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, sir. Because yes, sir. Yes.
So for selling the property, he will have to institute a separate suit for injunction, seeking a restraint against the defendant in the court where the property is situated, because he cannot file a suit where he is stationed, because Section 16 of the CPC will govern that suit, and he will
Yes,
have
sir.
to come to the court where the property is situated.
And sir, one more thing, sir, he again has to pay the court fees because earlier, because he is not in possession. Sorry, sir. Sir, just
Yes, yes, please. Please go ahead, Shobit.
hello. Sorry, sir.
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. That is my question, sir.
Sir, he is saying that since they were in the possession earlier, so they have to pay the court fees again. This was his last question.
Yes, he will have to pay court fee because he will have to seek possession. He can't maintain a suit without seeking possession. He will not be able to claim injunction without
Okay,
seeking
sir.
possession since he has been dispossessed.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Nitesh, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ankit, for such an informative session on this law of injunctions. Have been very beautifully been explained by you with the way of the judgments, and a lot of our viewers and participants were requesting for the judgments. I hope that I'll be receiving the citations from you and
I
circulate
will
amongst them.
certainly do
Thank
that.
you so much Ankit, for your time. We'll be obliged for you for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.